Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the spoilers for Rivals of Ixalan for the new Magic the Gathering set that's coming out in the next couple weeks. We've got a ton of cards to get to. From what I've been told, they are going to be releasing all the cards within the next week, so we've got a load of cards to get all the way through. So let's start with blue, and the first one up is Seafloor Oracle, which is a 2/3 Merfolk Wizard that costs 2 generic and 2 blue at the rare slot. Its ability is whenever a Merfolk you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So traditionally, the Merfolk they're a little harder to deal damage. They've got some specific cards like Spreading Season, things like that in the modern set that help them get their Island Walk abilities up and running. Drawing cards hasn't always been a tricky thing for them, but this will be a welcome addition to standard decks. If you've got it in limited, it's definitely worth playing just as a way to fill out your hand as you round out your curve. Next up, we've got Kumana's Awakening. It's again 4 mana, 2 blue, 2 generic, enchantment rare. It has Ascend. Again, Ascend is when you control 10 or more permanents, you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. Now, keep in mind, once you control 10 permanents, you don't get City's Blessing. You have to cast a card that has Ascend. So that's kind of how that triggers. So if you have 10 permanents in play and someone kills a creature, you now have 9, and then when you play this, you no longer have 10. So at any rate, this also has an ability of, at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card, and then if you have the City's Blessing, instead only you draw the card. So this is very reminiscent of Howling Mine for those of you that have been playing for a while. This is a great card that kind of gets better as the game progresses. Again, if you want to really show off the card drawing abilities of the card, you want to play this when you have your 10th island or your 10th permanent in a battlefield. So that way you're getting the benefit and not your opponent as well. Nevertheless, drawing cards is always a good thing. If you are poise yourself to benefit from drawing cards in your deck versus your opponent, this is something that you'll definitely want in your deck. It's pretty much an auto include in limited games. The next card, we're going to have to do a little bit of a translation here, is Watery Ambush. It is 1 blue and 3 generic for an enchantment. It says when a Watery Ambush enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 Merfolk creature tokens with hexproof, and then you can pay 1 blue and 3 generic, and target Merfolk can't be blocked this turn. Again, we saw that enchantments kind of won the day with the last with Ixalan, the Ixalan set. This I mean, in limited, maybe one of these would be good, only because late game being able to pay 4 and make one of your creatures unblockable. Again, Merfolk tend to have a little bit of a trouble getting combat through because they're so small. So making one of your guys unblockable, while it doesn't provide a ton of damage, but it does pair well with the Seafloor Oracle in the sense that it's going to deal combat damage and then you're going to draw a card. So it's nice that it synergizes with itself. So you get the 4 mana, you get the 2 1/1s that have hexproof. That's fantastic. That makes them difficult to get rid of. With instant removal and sorcery removal and things like that, and making them unblockable while paying 4 mana for 1 damage really isn't the best conversion. It still synergizes with itself pretty well. Next up, we have Admiral's Order. This is 2 blue, 1 generic for an instant rare. It has Raid. If you attacked with a creature this turn, you may pay 1 blue rather than paying the spell's mana cost, and it's simple: counter spell. So when I read this card, the first word out of my mouth was "damn." And then I read the flavor text, which is "damn the cannons, mates, charge." So very fitting. I don't know. This is we've seen cost reduction spells before. This one is very limiting in the fact that you can only counter a spell for 1 mana on your second main phase. So unfortunately, I don't think this is a good use for Raid. I mean, it's very what's the word? It's very flavor heavy, and kind of makes a lot of sense there. However, it's just difficult to kind of pin. You've got to have those small creatures that you can just run a 1/1 out, and then you play your big creature, and then you've got protection. So it might find a home in small pirate decks. Definitely token decks would be beneficial for this. So at the end of the day, it's a pretty sweet card. If you get it in limited, counterspells in limited are usually pretty backbreaking, especially if you're trying to throw down your bomb rare or whatever. But this is definitely something where you're gonna want to test the waters in your limited deck, or excuse me, in your standard decks. Just to make sure they're being used properly, or being used efficiently rather, not properly. The second card here is Time Stream Navigator. It's 1 blue, 1 generic for a human pirate wizard at Mythic Rare for a 1/1. It also has Ascend, again with the 10 permanents. When you cast this, then you get the City's Blessing for the rest of the game. But its ability is pretty sweet. So you pay 2 generic, 2 blue, and you tap it. So you can't do this when the turn comes out because it has Summoning Sickness. But you pay the 4 mana, tap it, and you put the Navigator on the bottom of your owner's library, and then you take an extra turn after this one. Activate this only if you have City's Blessing. So the neat thing about this is, while it's not going to make I don't think any waves in Standard, in Modern and Legacy, there's probably some shenanigans that you can do. Getting the infinite turns thing going. The rough part is making sure you have enough permanents. The mana usually isn't a big deal. 4 mana isn't that big of a cost to pay. The problem that I foresee with this, that traditionally was with these types of cards, is usually when you take an extra turn, take an extra turn with a card, those cards get exiled. So this possibly has a way to be broken in the sense that it's not exiled, it goes back to your library. Be that at the bottom of your library, you still have an opportunity to search it up, play it off of certain creatures that do shenanigans with your deck. So at the end of the day, pretty neat card. Won't see a lick of play in Standard. It's just too fragile. It'd be one thing if it had hexproof, or if it was if it had some type of form of haste or whatever. Obviously in blue there isn't much haste going around. So at the end of the day, not it's going to be a jank combo card at the most. Next up we have Induced Amnesia for 2 generic and 1 blue enchantment at the rare slot, and it says when Induced Amnesia enters the battlefield, target player exiles all cards in his or her hand face down, then draws that many cards. So you have 5 cards in your hand, you lay those face down, and you draw 5 new cards. Now you can do this on anybody. It can be at you, it can be your opponent, it can be anybody. When Induced Amnesia is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return the exile cards from their owner's hand, or to their owner's hand, excuse me. So, being able to refill your hand and possibly, bouncing if you have a way to bounce this card back to your hand, that would be fantastic. Getting rid of it would be, another way to kind of deal with getting those cards back. I wonder, exile all cards face down in his hands and draws that many cards. When Induced Amnesia is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, return the exiled cards to their owner's hand. So this kind of makes me wonder, and I don't know how this would work as far as the rules text is concerned. Maybe you guys can help me out in the comments. If you cast this spell, right, you put down 5 cards, you draw 5 new. Let's say within those 5 new cards you have a bounce spell. So you bounce this back to your hand. Now since it's not going to the graveyard, you don't get those initial 5 cards back. But since they remain exiled face down and you recast Induced Amnesia, and I guess you get 4 cards this time. Right, so there's 9 exiled cards that are face down, and let's say you destroy the enchantment. Do you pick up all 9, or do you just pick up the 4? This is probably something that would be in the rules text somewhere in the rule book. Does the first amnesia remember the second amnesia? And if so, that would be a huge win for this card. Other than that, pretty neat. It's inexpensive, so it can be abused very well. Pretty much any way you cut it. I look forward to playing with it for sure. Let's see here. The next card we have a translation here, Path to Discovery. It's a 3 generic, 1 green enchantment, and it's a rare, and it reads, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. So essentially, all explore means reads is reveal the top card of your library, put that card into your hand if it's a land, otherwise put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, the creature that's exploring. Then put the card back on top of your library or put it into your graveyard. So it's pretty straightforward. If it's a land, it's going to your hand. Anything else, you can choose to put you put the +1/+1 counter on the creature that is exploring. It's definitely worth noting that you have to have a creature on the battlefield to cast this spell. And if you choose you can put the +1/+1 counter on there, but then you get to choose whether the card goes back on top of your library if it's something that's vital to the game, or if it's not and it's something that you're trying to dig for something else, you can send it to the graveyard. Next up, we have Jadelight Ranger. It's 2 green and 1 generic rare slot Merfolk Scout that is a 2/1, and essentially it just enters the battlefield and it explores, and then it explores again. So if you hit 2 non-land cards, you're looking at a 4/3 for 3 mana. That's okay. Digging 2 cards deep is good. The key thing to remember here is when you explore once, so you look at the top card. If it's a non-land card, you either choose to put it on top of your library or on your graveyard, and then you explore again. So if you can definitely do some shenanigans where if it's a non-land card, you're like, oh, I just really need the 4/3, I need the blocker, I need to deal the damage, or whatever the case may be. If you need that 4/3 and you draw the top card or you explore the top card and it's a non-land card, put it back on your library and you get those 2 tokens back to back, because you're essentially looking at the same card for the first explore and then the second explore. So that's at the rare slot, so you're probably not going to get too many of these in your sealed pool. But again, one of these, this is kind of one of those cards that we saw this a little bit in the regular Ixalan, the initial release of Merfolk Scouts that really don't need to be in a Merfolk deck. If you've got a green dinosaur deck, this would work perfectly well in that deck, right? On turn 3, getting a 4/3, fantastic. If not, this definitely ramps you really well. Make sure that you hit your land drops, which is another thing that dinosaurs need to have. So this is kind of one of those splash cards that kind of go in, a couple different varieties of decks. So don't be afraid to put this in your dinosaur decks or just your plain green stomp decks. It's a solid card. Next up, we have World Shaper. This is 3 generic, 1 green for another Merfolk Shaman rare, 3/3. And again, this says, whenever it attacks, you may put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Now, this is a May ability, but why would you want to do that, right? Top 3 cards, that's a lot, especially in Limited. But graveyard shenanigans are always a thing, and this card kind of synergizes with itself, saying whenever World Shaper dies, put all land cards from your graveyard into the battlefield tapped. So this, this is a great way to kind of get some of your fetch lands back, which is, always a good thing. Although, having to pay 4 mana for a 3/3, it's not the best curve. It's probably not what you want to be doing on turn 4 in a modern game, but it's definitely got some fun playability in there for getting, ramping up to bigger, better things. So I kind of look forward to playing this card. It's an interesting ramp ability. Let's see here. Next up, we have another 3 mana Merfolk. It's a 3/3 for 2 green and 1 generic. It's called Swift Warden. It's got flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target Merfolk you control gains hexproof until end of turn. Pretty straightforward. It's easy to kind of get this one to work for you and protect your creatures. Removal is very heavy in Limited, so you'll play these if you're in green. Again, this is one of those cards, unlike the last Merfolk we talked about, this one does not play well with non-Merfolk decks. So you would not put this one in your dinosaur deck. This just protects your Merfolk. So your blue-green Merfolk decks, this is an auto-include every time, play every one you get. It's a decent body. It's got flash, so it doesn't necessarily have to protect something. Like if you just want to get it into play, and run the beatdown path, you can do that. Next up, we have Ravenous Chupacabra. This is an awesome card. I'm excited to play with this card. It's 2 black, 2 generic for a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. So it's basically murder on a creature. Murder was an instant for 3 mana, 2 black and 1 generic, and just said destroy target creature. This gives you a 2/2. It's good early when you can get one of their creatures out of the way. You know, their 3-drop, or if they're on the play first, you can get their 4-drop out of the way. No matter how big it is, send in your guys after that, or you can hold on to this and play it at the end of a game, towards the end of the game, and get rid of their bomb rare or whatever's kind of beating you down at the time. So very versatile card. Play everyone that you get in limited. I don't know about how this is gonna. I don't think this will fit into standard. Definitely a limited all-star. Next up, we have another enchantment. This is an aura called Dead Man's Chest. 1 black and 1 generic, and you enchanted an opponent's creature. And basically what it does is when the enchant creature dies, you exile cards equal to its power from the top of its owner's library. You may cast non-land cards from among them as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast those spells. So this would be great on just kind of like in a synergistic way. We were just talking about the Chupacabra. Turn 6. You play Dead Man's Chest on their 5 or 6 drop or their big baddie, and then you immediately drop this Ravageous Chupacabra, killing it immediately, and then you get to exile their top cards, and then start casting things as you see fit. Obviously, you have to pay to cast them, but the Dead Man's Chest has that nice little clause in there that allows you to pay mana of any color. So no matter what kind of deck they're playing, if it's red, blue, green, and you're in white, and you're in like white-black, you can still cast those spells using your white and black mana. So that's fantastic. A kind of good synergy there. Obviously, it's rare, so you're not going to get multiples of these, but could be a fun card to play with. Definitely swings the scales in your favor in limited for sure. All right, let's switch over to some white spells. This one was actually released yesterday, so we didn't get a chance to talk about it because it released after we had posted our video. Glorious Destiny is a white enchantment for 2 generic and 1 white, and it's got Ascend. And it says, Glorious Destiny enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of those chosen type get +1/+1, and they have Vigilance as long as you have the City's Blessing. So, an Anthem effect. This, it could go in vampire decks, it can go in pirate decks, or it can go into dinosaur decks because of the color combination. I don't think the dinosaurs are the best option for it, just because at 3 mana you're already at that point you're already casting your bigger stuff, so giving it +1/+1 really isn't the best deal. The Vigilance, on the other hand, is kind of a big thing. I think this will find a home in vampire decks, just giving them that extra oomph and making the 1/1 tokens a little bit more relevant. The Vigilance does not hurt, so again, the token decks, this is going to shine just because of the Ascend and how easy it's going to be to get to that point. Next up, we have, speaking of dinosaurs, we've got Shrine Altosaur. 4 generic, 1 white. It's a 3/4. If a source would if a source would deal damage to another dinosaur you control, prevent all but 1 of that damage. Again, just like we talked about with Glorious Destiny, 1 damage is not a big deal when it comes to dinosaurs, so this isn't gonna save it, or this isn't gonna this is gonna save your dinosaurs. But the thing is, lightning strikes and things like that, you don't really have to worry too much about the larger dinosaurs, because their toughness is usually 4 or greater. So at the end of the day, it's going to synergize well with your Enrage abilities, just because you're still getting that 1 hit of damage It makes blocking for your opponent a little bit tricky, just because they're still gonna get dealt damage. You still get the enrage trigger. So if anything, it's probably really reading your dinosaurs are indestructible or unblockable. So it's an okay card, but for 5 mana, 3/4, it's really kind of ho hum. The next card, Paladin of the Anointment. It's 1 white, 1 generic for a rare Vampire Knight. It's a 1/1. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you lost life last turn, put a +1/+1 counter on the Paladin. And then when it dies, you gain life equal to its toughness. So this is very mediocre. I really don't I don't see a lot of potential here. In limited, I can see a little bit more because you're taking little bits of chunks of life and little bits of hits here and there from the smaller creatures, and you can block accordingly so that you guarantee that this thing's going to get bigger. But I just don't think it gets bigger fast enough. It's susceptible to a bunch of removal spells, which, at the end of the day, once it dies, you gain the life back. So at the end of the day, I just don't see it being a huge all-star in anywhere but limited. If you get one in limited, again, it's rare, so you're only going to open, at most one. Oops, one too far. Next up, we have another translation card. Let's see here. Starving Paladin. It's 1 white, 1 generic for a 3/3 Vampire Knight. And I kind of enjoy this card. I'm kind of seeing a little bit of synergy here with the vampires. Basically, when it does not untap during your untap step, and then whenever you gain life, untap Starving Paladin. The cool thing here is the flavor. It definitely gets a flavor win for me. So I don't know, 2 mana for a 3/3. That's a pretty good deal if you've got some life gain in your deck. Again, limited. You're really not about that life gain strategy so much. So gaining life doesn't win you the game. Unfortunately, dealing damage does. The nice thing about this is the Paladin deals 3 damage on turn 3 in white, so it's definitely it's priced aggressively. So if you can gain that life on a regular basis, it's definitely worth an option. Again, that's uncommon, so putting 1 or 2 in your deck's not going to hurt. Bishop of Binding is next. It's 1 white, 3 generic for a rare Vampire Cleric. It's a 1/1. And it says, when it enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls until Bishop of Binding leaves the battlefield. And then whenever Bishop of Binding attacks, target vampire gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the power of the exiled card. So, this is excellent for the indestructible creatures in standard right now. It's nice because some of those indestructible cards have extreme amounts of power in their going for them. So this kind of gives you an all-around answer for those cards. It's a little fragile, it being a 1/1 for 4 mana. I still think Ixalan's Binding is a much cleaner removal spell for those cards. But if you're in vampires, you've got a way to protect Bishop's Binding, this is definitely a go-to card in standard. We'll see how it plays out. Vampire deck's got a lot of tools today and yesterday, so we'll see how that deck shapes out in standard. As far as limited's concerned, it's really gonna be. It's just gonna depend on what kind of pulls you get as far as your vampires go. If you're gonna go in this, I don't think this would push you into vampires so much. It's a decent removal spell. So it's a vampire itself, so it does synergize with itself. So if this is the only vampire you have in your deck, you won't be too upset. Again, it's definitely gonna shine when you're in a vampire deck. Next up is Sky Mercher's Aspirant. There we go, excuse me. 1 white for a 2/1. It's got Ascend, and it has flying as long as you have City's Blessing. So It's terrible early game, and it's pretty much terrible late game. That's pretty much all there is to it. I mean, a 2/1 for 1 mana doesn't really do anything for you. Having flying is great. This is kind of one of those cards that I would say because it has flying and limited, you would want to play it, but the first 10 turns, I don't want to say 10 turns, like the first 8 turns or 7 turns, are you gonna get to your 10 permanents? It is in the vampire colors. It's a vampire itself, so it does work within those confines of the those decks. But again, it would have been nice to see like maybe 1 mana for a 2/1, and it has flying and +1/+2, making a 3/3 flyer, which would be way more playable in limited, not so much in standard. But at the end of the day, it's it's ho hum. Let's see here. Next we got red. Daring Buccaneer is a 1 red mana human pirate at uncommon for 2/2, and in addition to casting the Buccaneer, reveal a pirate card from your hand or pay 2. That's right, red got there. We've got a 1 mana 2/2 pirate making the pirate deck that much more aggressive. This is going to be a lot of fun to play with, especially in limited. Play these, if you're in a pirate deck in limited, play them when you got them. I would say, if of your 23 spells, you're probably looking at maybe 10 to 15 creatures. If over half of those are pirates, play it. Go ahead and play it. Paying 3 mana for a 2/2 is not what you want to be doing, but at the end of the day, if you can drop this on turn 1, you'll be in the clear. Let's see here. Next up is another translation card. This is Talani's Summoner. It's 1 red, 1 generic for a human. It's got Ascend, and it reads, every time the summoner attacks, you may pay X red, so any number of colorless, generic mana, and 1 red. If you do, create X/1/1 elemental creature tokens, tapped and attacking. Exile them at the beginning of your next end step unless you have City's Blessing. Wow. This is pretty powerful. Extremely powerful late game because you can just pump out these things, especially if you have a way to protect this guy, or I guess this female. She will definitely be a target for removal. She's very fragile on turn, being at only 1 defense. But at the end of the day, if you can get 2 triggers off of her, it'd be awesome if she had haste. If you have a way to give her haste. I know we have a couple 1-drop hasty sorceries and instants. If you have that opportunity, this is definitely worth investing in. And then in limited, fantastic. Like she definitely sets up the board for going wide. The one thing to note is she has Ascend, right? So when you cast her, if you don't have the permanents right then and there, but your elementals put you at 10, casting another spell that has Ascend will trigger your City's Blessing. So therefore, you will not have to destroy those cards at the beginning of at your end step. So because the game will check for City's Blessing at the end step, not when you cast this initial creature. So just a little rules of verification there, but could be a lot of fun and limited. Definitely something I'm looking into building a deck around for standard. But yeah, definitely something you should check out. So the next card, probably the one card today that I'm super excited to play with. It's completely jank, but it looks like fun. It's got me, really excited about playing dinosaurs again. So much so that we've broken out the dinosaur deck, and we're gonna take it back to Friday Night Magic to kind of get prepped for the upcoming release. This is Ulti the Primal Storm. It's an Elder Dinosaur for 2 red, 4 generic. It's a 6/6, and whenever it attacks, exile the top card from each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. So the unfortunate thing is you have to cast them right then and there, right? So you can't. I don't believe this trigger. I don't believe this will carry over turn to turn. So if you attack with it, you have to cast them right then and there on that turn, or right then and there on that attack phase. It's a neat way to kind of give some creatures flash, I guess. But at the end of the day, when it's going to go in a dinosaur deck, you're going to have some big things. Nothing beats putting down a Carnage Tyrant for free after you have played this massive 6/6. If you've got a way to protect this creature, this is definitely something that will go a long way as far as foiling plans on the other side of the battlefield, especially when it comes to like things like energy and things like that really kind of. They need their cards to make their deck work, and there's a specific reason for each one of those cards to be in there. This is a great way to kind of limit that and win the game all in the same swoop. And I understand that this is definitely a win more card. I mean, 6/6, you attack with it 3 times, the person's dead, right? There's no two ways about it. But it's just a fun interaction. So next up, we've got Pirate's Pillage. This is a 4 mana sorcery, 1 red, 3 generic uncommon. And let's see here, as an addition cost to cast Pirate's Pillage, discard a card. So you discard a card, pay 4, draw 2 cards, and create 2 colorless treasure tokens that sacrifice tap for any color mana. It's okay. It's a little on the expensive side. It's nice that you kind of ramp up 2 mana for the next turn. Drawing 2 cards is always a good thing. Ditching something that's not relevant. So on turn 4, turn 5, this might not be the thing. But when you are 2 cards in hand, and this and something that's completely useless, like let's say one of those 1 mana 2/2s, this would be fantastic. A great use of resources. So. It's going to get played in limited. Probably play 1 or 2 of them. Probably no more than that. It won't see any play in standard. All right. So next up, we've got our gold cards. We've got 2 lords here for you. They're 2 mana 2/2s. The Merfolk Mistbinder is 1 green and 1 blue. All your other Merfolks you control get +1/+1. And Legion's Lieutenant is 1 black and 1 white. For a Vampire Knight, other vampires you control get +1/+1, and yeah. So these are 2 cards that we are getting special. We are getting special eyes on for the different tribes, so that'll help out a lot. Maybe we will see some Merfolk and vampires in the upcoming standard meta. I can't wait to see if there is a dinosaur version. I doubt there will be, but at the end of the day, one can hope. And then last up, we have Alanda, the Dusk Rose. It's 2 generic, 1 white, and 1 black for a legendary vampire knight. She is a mythic rare for a 1/1. So 4 mana for 1/1, not all that impressive. However, she has lifelink. She also has the ability whenever another creature dies, she gets a +1/+1 counter. So she gets bigger over time, which isn't too bad. Key thing to remember is it's another creature, so it could be yours or your opponent's. So that's definitely something to keep track of. Make sure you're not missing your triggers there. And then when she dies, she creates X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink equal to her power. So the quicker you can buff her up, you kind of get a better payout as she leaves the battlefield. Keep in mind that it is when she dies and goes to the graveyard, not exiled. So things like Ixalan's Binding that exiles creatures, that will not work. She has to die and go to the graveyard. So the lifelink is a decent bonus. Turn 4, 1/1, not the best use of mana in my opinion, but we'll see. And then last up, we have Waltley, the Radiant Champion. This is our second Planeswalker of the set. 2 generic, 1 green, 1 white for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker. You can +1 her to 4, and then you get to put loyalty counters on her for each creature you control. So if you have 3 creatures and you +1 her, her loyalty is going to go to 4, and then you're going to add 3 more, so she's going to go to 7. Okay, so that's how that works. Not too bad. All right, so she buffs up in loyalty pretty quick, right? You could -1 her, and target creature gets +X until end of turn, or X is equal to the number of creatures you control. Anybody catching a synergy here? Anybody catching a line of play? You want to play Watley with creatures. Big, small, you want to have a lot of them. And then her ultimate, which is kind of interesting in the sense that doesn't have blue. Right? White and green drawing cards? What? Although green usually draws cards when it has creatures. So anyway, so -8 her, get an emblem that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So the line of play here is getting her to 9, getting her to 10, which shouldn't be too difficult with the +1 ability. Right? If you've got 4 creatures in play and you +1 her, she's at 8. Right, so that's fantastic. People now, the biggest complaint right now is, oh well, if you've got 4 creatures in play, you should be winning the game. Yeah, that's very true. However, she is in white, so you could play her in a pseudo vampire deck and splash green. She would be perfectly poised to win out a game if you splash for green in a green and white deck. You've got tons of vampires hitting the battlefield. You know, obviously she's coming down on turn 4, so you should have a 1-drop, a 2-drop, and maybe a 3-drop. Or you know, if you've positioned your deck well enough, you could have a couple 1-drops on turn 3. At any rate, treasure tokens do not count towards this. It's just counting creature cards. Okay, so loyalty, buffing your loyalty, it's only counting your creatures. Buffing your target creature, it's only counting your creatures. So don't get confused here, because there's a lot of counting permanents. She is only counting creatures. So don't make that mistake when you're in your pre-release and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. 4 mana Planeswalkers are right at that sweet spot. Where they're not too powerful, and they're playable, and they're not 5 mana Planeswalkers where it's like, oh my gosh, that 1 extra turn. She's in green, so that means you've got ramp opportunity, so you could ramp into her, maybe play her on turn 3. That's a possibility. But at the end of the day, it's not getting her out quick to win the race. It's getting her out at the opportune time where you can plus her. So if turn 4 rolls around and you've got 3 creatures on the battlefield and 1 in your hand and Watley, play the creature and hold out for that nut draw next turn where you can drop her and plus her +1 all the way up to 8 for that first turn. And then you've got a stack of creatures to defend her. Like that's the thing I think people are missing with this card is usually Planeswalkers are identified as good or bad depending on if they can defend themselves, right? So this creature does not defend itself at all. And the idea is, if you've played this card and you played it onto an empty board, you're playing the creature wrong, right? You want to play this card when you have 2, 3, 4 creatures out, 1/1s, 2/2s, whatever they are, that you can chump block, you can defend her, and then build her loyalty up, and then you get to draw into your bigger, badder things. The idea that she gets +1 or +X on her -1, that's another win condition for many tokens decks, because at the end of the day, when you have 5 1/1s on the battlefield and your opponent has 3 2/2s or whatever, you can't attack into those. That's not a possibility for you. But if you give it +X and you're all of a sudden your 1/1 is now a 5/5, there you go. So at the end of the day, I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to playing it. Eli and I have, like I said, we pulled out the dinosaur deck. We're tooling around with it and actually thinking about putting white. We're trying to splash a 3rd color in there. White is on the docket to put in there just because of the ramp abilities of some of the white creatures. There's a couple white dinosaurs that are on the top end that we would like to play with. And this would go a long way with drawing cards in that deck. One of the things that white and green in the standard format is really struggling with. So I look forward to playing with it. Definitely one of the top cards today. So at the end of the day, guys, I really appreciate you watching. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. We'll be coming back every day for the spoiler release of Rivals of Ixalan. And make sure you head over to our Twitch channel as well at twitch.tv/72dpi online. We do streams every day. In fact, we're getting one started here in the next couple of minutes. We're going to be playing some old school games. We've got some podcasts that we like to talk about video games on. So make sure you head over there, get subscribed, and leave a comment down below with what you thought about your favorite cards, what decks you're looking to build. Are you playing in the pre-release? I want to know all about it. So leave those comments leave those comments down below, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a great night.